We're going to have a talk about one-hit wonders. The idea is that one-hit wonders don't create neurons, but your brand should. So what we'll do is, we're going to have a chat. I'm going to get the guys to introduce themselves, and then we're going to sort of talk around the subject. So, Semyon, do you want to introduce yourself and tell people what you do?
Sure. My name is Semyon. I'm one of co-founders and creative director of ZeptoLab. I'm in the mobile games industry for around 15 years. Actually, 3 of those years I spent here in Helsinki working in digital chocolate. And well, our probably most known game is Cut the Rope, obviously. But we're not only about Cut the Rope. We have several other games which are very successful.
Hanna.
Yes, I actually have the headset.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm Hanna. I'm from Lightneer. I'm the marketing communications lead there. And I have my background in actually entertainment. This is my first gaming company. I've worked before with different kinds of artists and festivals, and Live Nation, for example, and Slush. I've helped them out since 2011 a lot.
And this kind of panel came out of a conversation we were having about the role of brand in general. So
yes.
I think you've got a lot to add on that as well.
Yes.
So Natasha, do you want to describe yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to try to be short due to all the stuff I do. So hi, my name is Natasha Trygg. I am a CEO of Snowfall. For you, maybe more known as gaming company that focuses on Moomin games and Moomin brand. Other than that, I'm active in the gaming industry as a board member of Neo Games, IGDA Finland, and chairperson of Turku Game Hub as a business cluster in the southwest Finland.
And as someone who often gets mistaken for Moomin Papa, sorry.
I'm Moomin Mama went wrong.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
So let's talk about brands. So, and obviously, we all know about Cut the Rope. We all know about that sort of idea. But this question about the role of a brand, I think, is sort of central. Let's define it first. So we all know we're talking about the same thing. How do you guys look at brands in ZeptoLab? How do you think about them?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to mention that when we were working on the first original version of Cut the Rope, we were not thinking that much about brand, or about selling plush toys or anything like that. It was more on how to make the best possible game. And to make best possible game, you kind of already working on the, I think, most important components of the brand. You need to have the very appealing and memorable and original character. You need to have a catchy name. It's great to have a catchy tune, a music in a game. So in a sense, while achieving a goal of creating a great game, you already, I think, at least halfway of creating a great brand if the game will succeed. And I think we pretty much keep the same pattern with any game that we're working on.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting kind of area because obviously a lot of people who, I've got marketing training, so I kind of think about brands inherently. It's kind of in my DNA. But essentially, a lot of the behaviors that you do as a brand manager are essentially a lot of the design choices you're making, because finding that integrity, finding that, I think the phrase identifiable is kind of one of the key things. And if you think about just the basic principle of what a brand is, the word comes from literally getting something hot and metal and stamping it on something so you know it's yours. So Hanna, obviously you've got more of a marketing background anyway, but do you recognize this kind of evolving working process that delivers that identity?
Yes, definitely. What brand is basically when you have a recognizable brand. So we all have, it's actually scientific. It's in our brain. We have our own specified neurons for certain things that we find the most important in our lives. We have a neuron for our mothers and our most important relationships, but we also have neurons for McDonald's and H&M and Game of Thrones and Angry Birds. And the relevant question is, why? Why do we actually have these specificated neurons in our brain for certain kinds of brands? And I think the relevant answer to that is because they drive certain kind of meaningful emotions in us with a repeated pattern, and also they encourage us to take meaningful action. And that kind of cycle is what actually makes a neuron in our brain, and something that the one-hit wonders don't do. Because our brain doesn't prioritize the information, because it sees that it doesn't matter to our lives. And that's why it's so important to also include in the marketing messaging the kind of emotions that you want the players or your target audience. I mean, target audience is superly important. You have to know who your target player is, because then the messaging and also the emotions that you want the people to have are a lot different.
So I think we'll end up coming back to Semyon on that one, because I think intrinsically that comes out of the kind of game you want to make. But I kind of want to move it forward, because what I think I'm hearing is effectively the brain is looking for ways to shortcut things which it does regularly. And so it's forming these neurons in order to be able to make that pathway work. And every time we complete that pathway, we're getting some satisfaction. Therefore, we're getting some dopamine release. And therefore, we're getting positive reinforcement to that. Now, when you're coming along with a brand that's so famous and iconic as the Moomins, you're not going through that kind of experimental process. It's already there. How does that then translate to other media?
Yeah, well, before I get to that, I would like to just add to colleagues. The brand is basically standing for something, and as standing meaning having uniqueness. Whatever that uniqueness is, depending on the product, literally whatever brand we're talking about, whatever industry we are talking about. So gaming in such is not much different when it comes to branding like any other product, I mean, or sales as
Why
such.
should it be?
No, it's not, but that's because usually people, it's one thing how you approach target audience, because especially when you are dealing with the casual players or the hardcore gamers, of course the marketing approach is different, but the branding is pretty much the same thing. So, and there, when it comes to these neurons and all of that, story and meaningfulness, when it comes to uniqueness in the story, is something that comes there in the back of our head. Is it a good thing or bad thing? Is it part of our taste, personal taste? Like, do I like Kardashians or not? It's not, like, that's a personal thing, like, or let's say Angry Birds or whatnot. So this is something that now each individual can basically, relate to. But generally, they're all having the same base of the branding, stamping sort of thing. So it's about story as well. I mean, I think the story is very important when it comes to this emotional attachment to whatever it is. Is it a good attachment to it or bad? Like, as I said, Kardashian. So, but
this psychology kind of thing is really interesting, is in the sense of, like you're saying, we talked about neurons here, we talked about kind of pathways, shortcuts, but actually what you're talking about with narrative, I think is even, if you think about it, it's even more detailed. It's extremely
important, and when it comes to branding and something like, that's why, for example, I used to work as well in this sort of thing, so that's why I'm getting to them. So basically, that's why, slogans and this sort of having like a one sentence pitch that is just gonna, like, just do it. Like, and that's what is even that's the story as well, because that just 3 words together in the right time, right place is gonna tell so much about the actual and so forth. It's the whole philosophy behind. But however, when it comes to Moomins, they are very recognized, not just a national brand here in Finland, which are basically a cultural heritage, but worldwide. And actually, up to last year, they were in top 10 brands. Now they're in top 4, which is insane. I mean, to be honest.
Just gone up.
Insanely, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Even in China, it's just going. So basically, our approach is, when it comes to gaming now, is a bit different than when it comes to someone who has own IP, because basically we already have, the market is already there, the fan base, the community is already there. So basically, the thing is that we really have to explore what their expectations are and what their demand is in order to provide, in a sense. Of course, we as a game developers, we have freedom to do, game design and all that, and thankfully, I mean, that's the whole idea. I mean, because Moomin brand, and Moomin Characters is the company that owns the brand, right? So we work very closely with them, and they also want to, be, up the top, like what's happening out there now and what actually will sell the best. And that's where we come in to make the games that would be, because it's not enough to have, you know, like any game or something fastly done and just slap the brand on top of it. It's, yeah, it will give the downloads first, but it's not gonna keep the players. Yeah. That's why you need to have a good game design, good stuff. So basically how we design it in our studio is that literally use, you know, like blocks, like coder graphics. I mean, you should see those first concepts, like coder graphics that basically the same game can work just, and we would play it and we would get hooked on it, and then we put, you know, of course the story is one thing, especially if we, with Moomins, we have to, let's say if we, Moomin Undersale is based on the comic by Tuve Jansson, Moomin Undersale. That's the name. So basically we have to there follow the story, and that helps us a lot in the game design. But all in all, the game mechanics and everything has to be so much fun on their own that we can slap whatever on top and it's going to be fine. Like so.
Well, it's the game has to
exactly.
kind of stand up. And I'm kind of wondering about the contrast between what you're talking about and what, you know, would happen with the well, you were describing earlier with the kind of new game. It's like you're trying to think about the game being first, but as a result of that process, at what point do you realize whether this identity, this kind of this characters' arts, whatever the tone, the things that Keith was talking about earlier in terms of the environment, how they start resonating, and when does that start turning into a conversation where you think about the audience?
So, if I understood the question correctly, you mean at what point of game success it becomes a brand?
Well, I was actually thinking during the development. Actually, when do you think? I mean, or does it not happen until after for you, in terms of when it's released?
Well, definitely we think about how we will market the game while we develop it. But to be honest, we don't think that much about like how we will grow it into global brand and stuff like that before the game is actually being released and well received and become successful. Because, well, it's an indie panel, so I think it's also something, probably the only route that indie can take. I mean, ZeptoLab is probably not, like, it's hard to call our indies anymore, even though that we are independent and stuff. But indies usually have a very limited resources. So my advice would be, don't spend those resources, don't spend time, don't spend money on, you know, planning the expansion of your brand and like buying the outdoors advertisement before your game becomes successful.
I'm going to challenge that, because I think you do, but not in terms of the spending the money bit. I think what, particularly you guys, but what a lot of successful indies do instinctively is think about the integrity of the visual style,
yes,
how that works with the...
Those are things that I've mentioned, like think about making the great characters, great visual style, catchy name, and stuff like this, because they are the part of the brand already. But I mean, making a successful game, especially today in the free-to-play market, is super challenging game that would require all your resources, all your thoughts, all your time. So don't make it even more complicated for yourselves, really, because having a brand and an okay game doesn't help you. Having a great game and okay brand, well, it's good enough. I mean, you will get money to continue to survive as a company and continue making new games and coming out with a, well, successful brand in future. So I think that's games first.
But I do wonder, I mean, particularly like you say, the complication of going from free to play. I think what ends up happening for a lot of people is simplification. And I wonder whether that simplification process amongst, especially in a small team where they've got good, strong a vision in a wider sense of what the whole of the game feels like. I think when you get those teams working at their best and they're simplifying, effectively you're distilling the values of what that game is about.
Oh, well, of course, well, when I say like the complicated game, I don't mean that it has like lots of features and stuff. It's more about like the technical side and you know, bring it to market side. Those are the things.
So Hanna, let's take this forward. So what we're hearing here is like, you know, a lot of indies just don't have the time to think about the kind of long-term consequences of some of their brand decisions because they're just focusing on making sure this game works and actually can get it out the door and be good enough to be able to get some attention. But of course, the key thesis that you kind of presented earlier is actually one-hit wonders don't create this. It's kind of like this, this neural kind of pathway that we're talking about, this positive reinforcement we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, no marketing can save a bad game. I mean, that's a fact. But at the same time, I feel like the brand thinking should already be there in the design process of the game itself. I mean, branding, I think, has a bit of a bad rep in terms of, we think about McDonald's or like H&M.
It also sounds like magic. It sounds like someone's magically pulled something together. No.
I mean, the question is that, like, branding in general should ask is, why would anyone play this? Like, why? What is the reason that drives people to our thing, whatever it is? And I feel like you have to have some sort of a deeper story and a mission. I mean, it doesn't have to be like super complicated or like fake. I'm saying that if you actually tell people the passion that you have, why you started making the game in the first place, that's something that people can actually relate to. And sometimes I feel like game developers tend to forget that when they actually focus on doing the game, which is also, like, of course, crucially important. But at the same time, I would say, like, there are things that you can actually do without spending a lot of money in terms of brand thinking in general. And you can do PR, you can focus on, in the game design process, telling your story. I mean, it's a global world nowadays, and you can tell your stories in multiple different ways in the digital world, and you don't have to be tacky, or you don't have to be McDonald's.
The opposite, you kind of have to be authentic, especially if you're Indian.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff that, when you see Cut the Rope, you know exactly what's going on, and you intrinsically understand emotionally how you connect.
Yeah.
With that gameplay mechanic, and you connect with the character, and you connect with the way the unboxing happens.
That's part of making good game.
Oh, true, and I think that's really kind of what we're trying to get to, which is, I mean, I don't know how many of you anyone pitched for the Big Indie Pitch before? Anyone done that? Yeah. Do you know what the most common feedback we give people? What's your USP? What's your unique selling point? And I think that's really kind of, at the end of the day, the heart of, is that the heart of what we're saying with brand?
Yes.
It's been a distill what that USP is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how does this, so we've got this kind of spectrum, obviously
How does it work?
It's accidental. Well, no, I'm thinking about here we've got this accidental kind of aspect. If you think about the sort of, not accidental, it's not, what I'm really saying is I don't think it's accidental with the right team making these games. I just don't understand that that is the same thing as making a brand. But you're obviously coming from the point of view you do understand what making a brand is. I'm not saying that you don't, Semyon, but you are coming from that point of view where the brand is already front and central.
Yeah, I also.
Does that affect you?
Yeah, and also, well, I also have lots of experience with the indie development, although Snowfall is far from indie, let's face it. Like, come on, we have investment, we have a big brand, and we are about to announce the publisher, so it's like, what is indie about us? Except that we are small and we want to keep small, but that's a different business strategy. However, I mean, small team, sorry. So when it comes to marketing, there is a really big difference when it comes to indie marketing, the approaches, and something when you work with the big brand. I mean, or how you, because with your own IP, you build it along the way, like and story is extremely important of your team, of the company itself, of team members. I mean, you can use every trick in the sleeve when it comes to that, and that's the whole part of the, like also branding around the game as well, because those are the guys who actually made the game. When it comes to the brand or IP that is already successful, and now we are representing it. Well, first of all. Every single move we do or want to do, it has to be approved by the brand holders, and which is not an issue, but just something to have in mind because of the, well, legal part and everything else. So we have to, because we represent that brand now out there.
Anything you do has a knock-on consequence.
Exactly, and that is really, well, for some developers, I can see that as a big frustration. Thankfully, my well, part of my doctorate is licensing and copyright, so it's kind of okay for me to deal with it. So that's not an issue. But every single, like literally every bigger, let's say, Facebook post has to be approved, not mentioning anything else. So yeah, we have, let's say there is a fan base, as I said, there is a whole thing, but then we have to also bring some novelty to it, which is still in the same culture of the Moomin brand. So I just see that as challenging, not a problematic at all, but it's not easy, because you really have to, there is so much responsibility, so much expectations from the brand owner, from the audience, and so far, because brand itself is so big, there's a big demand for the games out there. That's why they need basically a game company that would be dedicated to their brand. And they also have other IPs as IP holders, so we are going to work with other IPs as well as a Snowfall. So not just but Moomins are our like first love, let's just say. So that's something that when it comes to going out there and making the games, because other games so far were basically kind of trying to be one-time hit sort of thingy, that basically you have some so-called easy game mechanics that you can just put moving characters on the top and it's gonna sell like just every single fan. No, it didn't sell at all. All these moving games out there are really crap, pardon my French, but they are really bad games. And that was the problem, to actually like get the people to stay with it.
Yeah, and I think so. I work when I'm not working for Unity. I'm making a game based on the Rocky Horror Show, and one thing I found is you've got this challenge trying to understand the audience and finding a way you make a game mechanic that actually works with the brand.
Exactly, because I can give you very little. I mean, I will just give few examples. What we as developers have to work with, and what our game designer has to work with, which is here in the audience. So if someone wants to talk to Petter Skult, just get to him. So basically, for example, Moomins cannot die. They cannot be hurt. Nothing bad can happen, really. I mean, there are little quarrels between them, but other than that, there is nothing really bad. So make a game around that. Second thing, they can't talk to the player anyhow. There can't be this fourth wall breakage of any sort. There can't be two same characters on the spot. Like, let's say you can't have multiplayer or something like that, where there would be two Moomin Peikos on the spot. Oh. But yet we are making multiplayer, so haha. And also, like as I said, like they can't die, they can't do this and that. Everything has to be like their movements, and everything has to go within actually how they are described, basically in the brand description and rules. And on the top of that, one more thing would be, for example, you can't put words in their mouths. So they can only say things which are in the comics, books, whatever Tuve made originally. So yeah, make a game where you can't put anything that they actually say outside of the story if you follow that story. Again, these are the challenges. So that it's not impossible, but
that's design constraint, though.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, I think you get the best value of it. What I want to do is take that further and look at the kind of when you don't have someone else policing that brand. Is that life easier for you, or does it actually become harder because you've got to make the constraints to continue that brand?
No, I think it's easier.
Okay.
I mean, we experiment around the brand quite a lot, and I had experience working with an external brand in previous companies I worked in, and I know that it can be quite a struggle. So of course we're in a better position when we make decisions inside the company.
But it's still, it's still a challenge, because at the end of the day, you've made some decisions about what that brand looks like, feels.
It's a responsibility. If we do a bad decision, there is no one to blame except ourselves. Yes.
And at the end of the day, you've got, if you're going to make new games with that character, or you're going to make new levels or so on and so forth, if they don't have some continuity. And how do you police that continuity? I mean, so that's really the question. How do you police the continuity?
Common sense, mostly.
Maybe that's it. I mean, this is the question that really it comes down to, which is, how do we know when we've got a one-hit wonder or when we've got a brand? And is it fixable? I mean, how do we know what the difference is? What do you think?
Well, I don't think there's like a one cure for this answer or for this question. But I would say that, of course, there are certain specifics that, make up a good brand and a success. Obviously, with the gaming industry, it's having a really good game that people can emotionally engage to. I think the biggest thing is actually the emotions that it brings, whether it's, funny in some way, or quirky, for example, with Angry Birds, or whether it's really addictive within the gameplay itself, or whether it has awesome characters like Pokemon that you can collect, or something that the people can relate to, and actually their story is intertwined with the brand itself. And I think that's, it's the same kind of in all entertainment, to be honest. I mean, what makes a really successful artist, what makes a really successful TV show, like Game of Thrones or Stranger Things, it's initially the feeling of being involved as a person in there in a way that's meaningful. And if you can't have that experience in the game, if it's just generic, the whole experience of playing, and as well as the marketing or how you present yourself, then I mean, you have at least a really less of a chance to succeed if you don't think.
It sounds like what we're basically saying is that it's about focusing on the emotional response.
Yes.
And it's realizing at the end of the day, a brand is a shortcut to help people connect with what otherwise would be just an ambiguous process.
Yeah, I mean, think about Apple. I mean, Apple is always like this big example with when you think of branding. I mean, it's just a expensive computer, Mac. But at the same time, they've done their branding and their target audience really well. They have actually figured out the why people want to identify themselves with the brand. So initially, it's about building yourself, your own brand, with the brand that you have, and you want to connect to these people who you want to, have in the game itself. And I mean, if you think about Apple's Think Different campaign, if you think their target audience is, let's ditch all of the other ones and let's focus on the creative people who, we want to have the best computers for, and, making this, rebels and misfits and making all of this kind of, storyline around that, I think, that's a really good example of how we should also consider making the storylines around games and making them meaningful to the player and to the people that
Sounds like we're almost getting to social identity theory at that point.
Definitely, yeah. Identifying oneself by playing something. As a gamer, I'm an actual gamer. That is the thing. The games you play basically identify you in a sense as well. When it comes to Moomins, just to add to this, definitely having this sort of immersion, because what we want to do in our games is that we really want players to get, especially those who are Moomin fans, to get into the Moomin universe and really experience all of that, including even AR, VR stuff in the future. So there will be all sorts of things that people can actually do with them.
And therefore associate themselves with that identity.
Exactly.
And immerse themselves with that nostalgia or whatever else that emotion might be.
Exactly, yes.
So we're running out of time. So unless someone's got questions, which case put your hands up and shout, because I'll come to you. But what's the one piece of advice you'd give someone looking at the game? How should they think about it to realize what the brand potential of that game? What do you think? I know it's a tough one.
And you say just we have 1 minute left. I mean, seriously.
Exactly. Just one quick.
Another panel, please.
Right. Holy shit. Wow. I don't know. One piece of advice. Don't only trust yourself. Also, listen to your players. Listen to the story, and think about the emotions and your own passions and why you're doing what you're doing, basically, and make it into a nice story that people can relate to.
I'm sorry about being a bit of rebellious here.
Do it.
But my advice is focus on the game. Make it as great as possible. Make sure it has great, memorable characters. Make sure it has all the great name and stuff like that. Make sure that you keep IP, because some publishers would try to take it from you if you go with publishers. And once you have a successful game, then build on that success and create a brand out of it.
One more just from me. Basically, I agree with both, but depends on what you do. Like, is it your own IP and brand, or you're working on, well, external IP? Either way, focus on the game. The quality of game is essential. Again, the brand and all that definitely has to go hand in hand. But at the end of the day, no matter how pretty graphics there are, or how big brand you have already working with, if the game sucks, no one is going to play it. Focus on the game.
So I've forgotten who said it, but the classic line is, "It's the gameplay, stupid." And that kind of works. But what I would say is, whilst it is the gameplay stupid, that does not mean that you should ignore the player brand emotional response. And you think of that as a constraint, and that will help you get a lot further. And on that note, I'm going to thank the panelists and move on to the next panel. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.